Uhuru, my name is Mariah, and welcome to the finale, part three of Burning Spear Media's reenactment of the Uhuru anti-colonial free speech trial of the century. Before we begin the reenactment, I will let you know that the Uhuru Three were found not guilty of acting as agents of the Russian government. In a contradictory and unjust verdict, they were found guilty of conspiring to act as agents of the Russian government. They were returned to the Tampa Federal Courthouse on December 16th for their sentencing hearing. The government wants to lock up 83-year-old Chairman O'Malley, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville for 5 years and to fine them $250,000 each. Freedom-loving people say not 1 day in prison. Everyone is encouraged to attend the December 15th Sunday rally, the sentencing hearing on December 16th, and the post-sentencing gathering to show your support for the Uhuru Three. And you can learn more at handsoffyahoo.org. That's handsoffyahoo.org. In episode 1 of this trial reenactment, we shared with you the background of the case and the indictment, where the government set a precedent in using a foreign agent statute to criminalize pure political speech. We also heard excerpts from the attorney's opening arguments. In episode 2, you watched as the Uhuru Three attorneys exposed the U.S. government's conspiracy to spread disinformation about the Uhuru movement, even forcing the state's lead witness to admit under oath that they had no evidence whatsoever of Russian interference in Uhuru candidates' electoral campaigns as alleged in the Department of Justice press statements and indictment. Today, in the final episode, we'll take you back into the courtroom to see what the Uhuru Three attorneys showed the jury. We'll hear closing arguments from both sides, the verdict, and Chairman O'Malley's response. We'll start with Uhuru Three attorney Addie Griffin, as she introduces the defense's evidence, beginning with the newspaper articles from the Burning Spear going back decades. These articles show that the political position of the African People's Socialist Party opposing U.S. colonial wars has been consistent for decades, not as a result of Russian direction or control. In order to review these documents and video recordings during closing arguments, court proceedings require them to be entered or published into evidence. Judge Jung?
All right. I think there's some defense evidentiary presentation, so we'll take that at this time. Are there some exhibits to be published?
Yes, Your Honor. The first exhibit is the Burning Spear newspaper. We will present the cover page of the newspaper articles. Exhibit 5A through N, 5A, Articles of War, 5C, 1979, Support for Iran, 5D, 1980, Afghanistan, 5E, 1980, Opposition to the Draft, 5F, 1980, Iraq, 5G, 1981, Support for Libya, 5H, 1982, Solidarity with Nicaragua, 5I, 1984, Grenada, 5J, 1991, again, Iraq, 5K, 2011, NATO war in Libya, 5L, 2012, Syria, 5N, 2014, capitalist greed in Ukraine. Exhibit 70, a 2022 O'Malley Taught Me clip featuring an indigenous man from Ecuador. Exhibit 71, a 2021 O'Malley Taught Me clip featuring a South African presenter. Exhibit 77, Burning Spear, detailing how contributors from around the world could submit content. Exhibit 78, a 2011 Burning Spear article by Unión del Barrio featuring a Mexican leader. Exhibit 79, a 2012 Burning Spear article by Isil Danto, a Haitian leader. Exhibit 40, a 2015 interview with Amalia Shatella in Moscow, conducted by Anastasia.
Okay, so you said that your party is for people who are under oppression. You help them. What do you mean under oppression? What do you mean? What does it mean, oppress people under oppression?
Well, we've got two aspects of it. When we say oppression, effectively what we mean is people who are dominated by a particular system. In America, for example, you often hear the reference of it being a country a nation of immigrants. But Africans are not immigrants in Americans. We are captives. That's how we happen to be in America. And though people often refer to Africans as citizens, we're not citizens, we are colonial subjects. And when you have a situation where the state acts as a force that denies rights, that takes life from people, annex their lands and do things like that, that is what we call oppression. But this is an oppression that also is related to economic exploitation. And most of the people who live under capitalist domination experience economic exploitation. Although all of them do not necessarily experience colonial oppression, most people who experience economic exploitation also have to feel political oppression, because that's the only means by which an unjust system can work. No slave is voluntarily going to be a slave, and no working person is voluntarily going to allow the value of her labor to be expropriated by somebody who does not work. So force is an absolute necessity, and that's what we mean when we talk about oppression.
So politics is always close to economics.
Yes.
And if economy is oppressive, is economy for slavery and exploitation, so the political system also works for it.
It is, in fact. In fact, we can say that politics is in reality concentrated economics. And when you have a system that benefits a handful of people at the expense of the vast majority of the people, the politic of that system reflects that reality. And that's what most of us are confronted with.
Okay, I understand.
Exhibit 11, a video of Amalia Shatella after his return from Moscow in June 2015.
I did a radio interview, and somebody asked me, there was a radio show in Washington, D.C. It's a very popular show in Washington, D.C. And the host of the radio show asked me, didn't I think it was possible that the Russians who invited me to come there had done so in order to use me in some fashion against the United States. And I thought it was an incredible kind of question, and it was startling kind of question. It was not easy for me to respond to it and with a straight face, because I didn't understand how the notion of the Russians using me by inviting me to Russia could even be some kind of factor, could even be something that somebody would think about. And the fact is that I went there to do what I could to use the Russians. The fact is that we have a situation where we're involved in a life and death struggle with the U.S. imperialism and have been forever. And for the longest period of time subsequent to the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, we've been in a state of near isolation. And it's important to us to be able to establish and identify allies all around the world who can unite with us in this struggle that we have with this terrorist organization that calls itself the United States government.
Exhibit 74, footage of Chairman Yeshitela attending a conference in Moscow in September 2015. Exhibit 45, a 2016 letter from Penny Hess requesting a solidarity statement from Alexander Ionov for the African People's Socialist Party plenary session. Exhibit 76, the 2016 plenary political report, which includes Alexander Ionov's video presentation. Exhibit 22, a video of a 4-city encampment tour promoting a petition to charge the UN with genocide. Exhibit 25, a 2018 letter removing Augustus Romain Ghazi Kotso from his position as Secretary General and expelling him from the African People's Socialist Party. Exhibit 30, a video dated February 20, 2022 of Chairman Yeshitela discussing the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Exhibit 32, a video of Alexander Ionov speaking on Omali Taught Me at the invitation of the African People's Socialist Party. Exhibit 2, a 1977 document titled Tactics and Strategy for Black Liberation in the U.S., authored by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. The last exhibit is Exhibit 93, an April 20, 2014 Burning Spear article titled Ukraine, Russia, EU, US, and the Crisis of Imperialism. That concludes our exhibits, Your Honor.
Thank you.
At this time, the defense rests.
So here's a note to you who are watching. Some of these exhibits that were presented to the jury in order to show the consistent political position of Chairman Omali and the African People's Socialist Party in opposition to the US military, other interference in other countries. These exhibits prove that the independent, self-defined worldview of African internationalism was up and expressed decades before Chairman Omali visited Russia and spoke at a conference there. Other exhibits were entered to show that the APSP's monthly journal, the Burning Spear newspaper, accepts and prints articles from writers all around the world. So the printing of an article written by the Russian NGO head Ionov was not a matter of operating under the direction and control of the Russian government, but was consistent with the editorial practice of the Burning Spear to share news and views and foster understanding internationally. Speaking of the Burning Spear, before we get into the closing arguments in the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century, we're going to take a short break with Soliana Bakel, managing editor of the Burning Spear newspaper. Soliana?
Uhuru, thank you, Mariah. My name is Soliana Pakel, and I am the managing editor of the Burning Spear newspaper. I personally wasn't able to attend the trial, but I am loving this Reader's Theater, which is giving us a peek into this historic event. I, of course, want to salute our chairman, Omali Yeshitela, who's the founder of the Burning Spear, and salute to Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Yeshitela, whose tireless work as architect of the Black Power Blueprint is turning the chairman's vision for African self-determination into reality. As our narrator Mariah told us, the Uhuru 3 will face sentencing on the wrongful conspiracy conviction on Monday, December 16th in Tampa Federal Court. The maximum sentence is 5 years in prison and a fine of $250,000 each. Over 1,600 character letters have been received by the Uhuru 3, and they expect to again pack the courthouse for the sentencing hearing. Our call is for not 1 day in prison. But even as we make that call, we know that over 1 million African people are behind bars in the US today, where the colonial prison system serves to terrorize our people and extract massive profit in modern-day slave exploitation of our people's labor. Our African brothers and sisters are isolated from their community and denied access to decent food, healthcare, and even to news and information about what's happening in the world. Since its inception in 1969, the Burning Spear newspaper has been shipped for free to any prisoner who requests it. So today we are shipping each issue to over 800 prisoners at a cost of $1,000 per month. We of course want to call on everyone watching now to help us raise $1,000 to cover the cost of just 1 month's printing and shipping for this important and very critical program. It's called the Mafundi Lake Prisoner Subscription Program, named after the heroic African political prisoner. So for $25, you can sponsor a free subscription for one prisoner, or you can become a sustaining donor and set up an automatically recurring monthly donation. So please go now to theburningspear.com/prisoner-fund and make your contribution. We, of course, can't forget about our family and friends who are locked up. We stand with them and call for an end to the mass incarceration of African people. At our next break, I'm going to give a shout out to those of you who have contributed to the Mafundi Lake prisoner subscription program. So keep an eye out and feel, empowered to donate and help out. And so just back to you, Mariah, and the Burning Spear Media Readers Theater Troupe. Uhuru.
No, thank you, Soliana, and salute to the Burning Spear newspaper, voice of the International African Revolution. Come on, y'all. Go ahead and hit up that burningspear.com/prisoner fund and make your contribution. We can't forget about our family and friends that are locked up. Now, next, in our reenactment of the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century, the jury heard closing arguments from both sides. In court, each of the attorneys spoke for about 30 to 60 minutes. For this reenactment, we've broken up excerpts from their closing statements into segments that allow you to hear arguments back and forth on some of the key issues. Prosecutor Goodman delivered the government's first closing argument.
The defendants knowingly partnered with the government of Russia. The defendants acted at the direction or control of the Russian government to sow division right here, and they failed to disclose any of that. That's what this case is about. Count 1, the conspiracy charge, has 4 elements that the government must prove. 1, 2 or more persons must agree to try to accomplish an unlawful plan. 2, the defendant knew the unlawful purpose of that plan and willfully joined in it. 3, conspirators engaged in at least one overt act as described in the indictment. 4, that overt act was timely and in furtherance of the conspiracy. Count 2, acting right here in the Middle District of Florida as agents of the Russian government.
All right, now, y'all, this is key. This is so important. Now, listen, they had to agree to do something illegal, and they had to know it was illegal. And the so-called overt acts, they were spelled out in the government's indictment, circulated a petition against genocide, testifying at United Nations hearings, running for office on a reparations platform, publishing an article opposing the ban on Russian athletes in the 2016 Olympics, traveling to speak at conferences, opposing U.S. funding and arming of the war in Ukraine, hosting a Zoom live stream with a guest from a Russian NGO, pure political speech that is supposed to be protected by the First Amendment, right? Although the Uhuru 3 attorneys worked closely together as a team, each of them served as a representative of one client. Attorney Addie Griffin represented Chairman Amalia Shatella.
A revolutionary, an activist, a man of conviction who stands for what he believes in and fights for the liberation of all Black people, both in the United States and across the globe, and a man who has done so for his entire life. Amalia Shatella is not for sale. This case was a direct attack by the United States government in an effort to censor the political views and the political rights of Amalia Shatella, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville. The African People's Socialist Party and Amalia Shatella have dedicated their lives to ensuring Black people can exercise their freedom, their right to free speech and political association without fear of imprisonment or death. You saw the evidence. Why have they dedicated their lives to this? Because it's critical to the liberation of Black people globally. That's what they fight for. Since 1972, the African People's Socialist Party has fought for Black people to be paid reparations for the genocide, oppression, and enslavement of the African people. Why did Penny Hess and Jesse Neville join the African People's Solidarity Committee? Why did they fight for reparations and against genocide? Do they believe that slavery was a crime? Do they believe that victims of crime should be compensated? Do they believe that all Black people and African people are actually descendants of slaves to this very day? Do they advocate for the victims of slavery to be paid back by reparations? They do. The judge explains to you that the First Amendment of the United States is very important, that popular speech doesn't need to be protected, but unpopular speech does. We have a right to speak freely. We have a right to dissent. We all have that right. You heard from 13 government witnesses, and every single one of them got up there and had to admit, I don't have any independent knowledge on this case. The agents cherry-picked what they wanted. They then had the forensic specialists create the reports with the information that they wanted, and then the government created their version of events. They also used witnesses who didn't have any knowledge in the case, that didn't speak to any witnesses, that didn't conduct any investigation. Is that evidence? What does the government do when they don't have any evidence? They blow smoke, and that's what they did. My client and the people sitting over there are innocent. They advocated speech, political publications, and political rallies.
Wow, just how Attorney Griffin said, they blow smoke, and we have the right to speak freely, and we all have that right. Now, next up, Attorney Mataki Akbar represented Jesse Neville.
This case is not about Amalia Shatella, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville. This case is This case is the battle between the United States and Russia, and they're using this organization as pawns in their information war. The idea, if you work with the Russia, you're on the wrong side. If you talk to the Russians, you're on the wrong side. That Russia is the boogeyman. They bring up sensationalize everything with Russia, everything about this case, because it is about the negative idea, this war against Russia. Who knows what Alexander Ionov was or wasn't doing? But we do know that this organization and these people were about the work of the community for 50 years. And when they had somebody come to them and say, we want to tell the world about Black men dying and about unjust wars, we want to show the world the work that you've done, that you've been doing all this time, because the media here won't share it. The chairman said, I don't know, but I think they're tied to the Russian government. They have their agenda and we have ours. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The jury's instructions will tell you that it's okay to have mutual interests. Simply acting in accordance with foreign interests does not make a person an agent of a foreign government.
You heard Attorney Akbar say that they have their agenda and we have ours. So during his closing argument, Uhuru 3 attorney Leonard Goodman, who represented Penny Hess, explained the dangerous legal precedent the government has tried to establish with this case. The first time a foreign agent statute has been used against purely political free speech.
I want to talk for a second about the words we operated or acted as an agent. This statute is intended to go after spies, people who commit espionage, people who secretly sell out their government and secretly gain sensitive information and send it back. Here, this statute is being used to go after political activists, people who for 50 years have been protesting, raising awareness, trying to recruit people to their side and make people aware that everything is not okay in America. This is a very dangerous case because what the government is saying is that if you are a publisher of a newspaper, as these defendants are, and you allow Russian voices to submit articles, then you need to register as a foreign agent or you will go to jail. We need to be able to hear both sides. If the United States government is allowed to suppress one side, we all lose. The prosecutor was misleading. If we are allies with somebody or partners, that is not direction or control. Direction or control means that one party is in charge and the other takes direction.
Just how Attorney Goodman said, we need to hear both sides or we all lose. So the government surely was misleading and misled the jury. In one statement, the prosecuting attorney, Menno Goodman, quotes an email where Chairman O'Malley said, "We are not a charity group. We have interest. Russia has interest." Then the prosecutor concludes, that's the conspiratorial agreement. But no, it isn't. Remember, the conspiracy charge says 2 or more persons must agree to try to accomplish an unlawful plan. So what's the unlawful plan? Exercising our rights to free speech and expressing dissent about U.S. government policies? The jury found the Uhuru 3 not guilty of acting as Russian agents. So what unlawful plan was accomplished through the so-called conspiracy? Attorney Akbar reminds us of who was in control, and it wasn't the Russians.
The government showed you pictures before Chairman O'Malley Yeshitela was interviewed by Anastasia, but they didn't show you the interview because it's inconsistent with their theory. Anastasia said, "Why are you here? How can we help?" And he said, "I want to send the message to the world about what's going on in the United States of America. I want to talk about these police killings. I want to let people know that indigenous people in America had their land stolen." That doesn't make him an agent of a foreign government. That makes him a man who stands on principle and has been standing on his principles for the last 50 years. The day after he got back, somebody said, maybe the Russian government is using you. And he explained, how are they not using me? Let me be clear. Let me clear this up right now. They're not using me. I'm using them. I'm using them to further my goals of what I need to do. A conspiracy requires an government to break the law, an agreement to break the law. And what's the law that they are alleging that they broke? Being foreign agents. So in both counts, 1 and count 2, they have to prove they were foreign agents. And what is essential in proving that they were foreign agents, that they worked under the direction and control.
Okay, so Attorney Akbar made it clear that a conspiracy requires an agreement to break the law. Then the Uhuru 3 attorney, Addie Griffin, laid the groundwork and went deeper into why direction and control doesn't apply here, and reminded the jury that the government's own witnesses had admitted under oath that the African People's Socialist Party was acting with their own agency and self-determined agenda.
Nothing they did was a crime. They never worked at the direction and control of anyone. Every time they may have been asked or presented with an idea, they didn't just go along full force. No, absolutely not. They took it back to their party in a meeting. They discussed whether it aligned with what they wanted to do, and they collectively and collaboratively made the decision. They worked together, and they worked together with the anti-globalization movement of Russia. The agents ultimately had to agree that based on the information they had, that the African People's Socialist Party had its own goals, and that they placed demands on the anti-globalization movement of Russia. Agent Droop agreed that it was a cooperative partnership and admitted point blank that the speech was not at the direction of the anti-globalization movement of Russia, because it was being done anyway by the African People's Socialist Party. Their agent, their testimony, their words. There is no evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed.
So in addition to the lie that the Uhuru 3 functioned under the direction and control of the Russian government, the government's case also relied on the ridiculous allegation that Chairman O'Malley, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville knew for a fact that the Russian NGO leader Ionov was reporting to a member of the FSB Russian intelligence service. In episode 2, you saw how the government brought in FBI agent Corey Miller to testify that Sukhodolov, a person with whom Ionov had communicated, was an FSB agent. Remember, the FBI agent Corey Miller was revealed to be the only person in the entire trial who apparently had actually met with an FSB agent and on American soil. Uhuru 3 attorney Addie Griffin asked the jury to take a critical look at the government's twisted case.
We know that in 2017, Corey Miller, an FBI agent who specializes in anti-terrorist areas, met with a man named Sukhodolov and testified that he was the same man as the man in the visa application found in the iCloud. The government has you believe that Russia is the enemy and the terrorist, yet the government is meeting with him. They trust him to provide information about counterterrorism at the exact same time that he's working against the US citizens. Given all the money that the Department of Justice has, all the intelligence and all the background checks that they were doing to ensure that Sukhodolov was not a threat, he could enter into the US knowing that he was working for the FSB in Russia, and nobody in the United States government knew that at the same time he was working against our citizens and trying to use the African People's Socialist Party. So if they didn't know it, with all their resources, how would anyone ever expect that anybody in the African People's Socialist Party would have any knowledge whatsoever that they were working with the Russian government?
If they didn't know it with all their resources, just how Attorney Griffin said, how would anyone else ever expect anyone else to know that? Come on. If Sukhodolov was such a threat to the national security of the US government, why did the FBI invite him to a collaboration meeting? If what the prosecution accuses the Uhuru 3 of was true, that would make the US government agents of Russia, wouldn't it? Well, the Uhuru 3 attorney Leonard Goodman elaborates and again reiterates the independence and self-direction of the African People's Socialist Party and its relationship with the anti-globalization movement of Russia.
There must be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that we knew that Ivanov was a Russian official or Russian government. I want to remind you also that Ivanov was a confidential informant. He was concealing his relationship with the FSB. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they have not proven that we knew that Ivanov was the Russian government. In the opening statement, I mentioned that in September of 2015, Penny learned about a conference in Russia called the Dialogue of Nations, the rights of people to self-determination. And Penny thinks, wow, the chairman should be invited to that. We can meet people that have similar ideologies and form new alliances. And she asks Anastasia, Ivanov's assistant, why aren't we invited? And the answer is, we'd like to invite you, but under one condition. You have to declare that you are for a separate state for people of African descent in the United States. And Penny explains, well, that's not our belief. And then she sends the party's position paper. We stand in unconditional solidarity with the right of the indigenous and Mexican people to the right to self-determination and sovereignty on their own land. We'd love to come to your conference, but our views on this topic are unconditional. That's not an agent relationship. We never signed up to do anything for Russia in the United States. This is complete nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. One other item I want to bring to your attention brings down the house of cards that you've been sold. They were bullying Penny, and Omali jumps in and says, Uhuru, this is Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I understand what Alex is asking for, but I don't know what that has to do with the promise that you made about getting us the money. Then he goes on at the end and says, it must be understood that we entered this relationship with the anti-globalization movement of Russia as allies, not employees.
All right, y'all, you heard it. The Uhuru movement works for Black people, not for Russia. The Uhuru Three never sacrificed the mission of advancing the African liberation struggle in their mutual cooperation relationship with Alexander Ivanov and the anti-globalization movement of Russia. The US government will have you to believe that 50 plus years of African internationalist strategy and development of theory all came down to directives of Russian nationals starting in 2015. You've learned that's not the case. In one segment of Prosecutor Goldman's closing argument, he makes the insulting allegation that the donations of a few $1,000s from Alexander Ivanov to projects of the Uhuru movement constituted a means by which the Russian government exerted direction and control. He cited bank records showing two deposits from Ivanov totaling $3,476.20 to support the Uhuru movement's multi-city protest tour on the genocide question. He also cited a $500 contribution from Ivanov to a public online fundraising event carried out by the Uhuru Solidarity Movement.
The United States requests you to consider the evidence and then return the only verdict consistent with the evidence, that these defendants are guilty of conspiring and actually acting as foreign agents of the government of Russia without notification to the Attorney General. The defendants are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, the Uhuru Three attorney Leonard Goodman showed this, set him straight, and called on the jury to see right through the government's lies.
Not-for-profit is allowed to take donations from outside of the United States. There's no rule against that. The amount of these donations is trivial, especially compared to the scope of the work that these defendants do every day, every week, every year. And the next overt act is the Ukraine protest after the war broke out in the spring of 2022. The Uhuru movement hosted programs against fueling the war in Ukraine. The prosecutor told you in his argument that the reason they made these protests is because they got a message from Ivanov, which was a call to arms. But what the evidence shows, ladies and gentlemen, is that the first event that they hosted was on February 23rd, before there was any communication from Mr. Ivanov. And as Agent Bowen testified, the positions that they took on this war were consistent with the positions they had taken for years and years and years. Mr. Goodman also talked about the conspiracy charge and told you that partnership is all they have to prove. That's simply not true. The other thing I want to mention is that the indictment alleges that after our first trip to Russia, we agreed to become agents of Russia. Where is the evidence of this? The government argues that we agreed to sow discord for Russia. There is no evidence of that, not a shred of evidence. Agents got on the stand and conceded this point. No, you all were doing these protests because these are core issues that you really believe in. Remember also that defendants Penny, Jesse, and Omali, they're activists. They do protests. They try to bring awareness to issues. They try to make people question their government. That's what they do. They're trying to bring people to their side. They're not trying to divide people. They're trying to promote change. The whole thing makes no sense that they would enter into a conspiracy to become agents of Russia after 50 years of doing this work. It's an insult to your intelligence to even make that argument. In the spring of 2022, the defendants were hosting events against supporting Ukraine and sending weapons to Ukraine, arguing that the US provoked Russia's invasion by sponsoring a coup in 2014 to remove the elected president of Ukraine. The views that they were expressing in spring of 2022 were views we weren't hearing anywhere, not in the New York Times, not on CNN. And it takes a lot of courage to be out there saying, no, we don't support this, when the government is saying we're going to spend $100 billion of your tax dollars to ship weapons to Ukraine. So that was spring of 2022. And what happened in July of 2022? FBI SWAT teams show up at Omali, Penny, and Jesse's homes and their offices. They take all their files, their laptops. The government had 20 to 30 FBI agents working on this case. They interviewed everyone they could find and that had knowledge about these defendants, and yet they could not find one person to come to court under oath and say those people are Russian agents. They are frauds. They are mercenaries, not one person. The decision you make here is going to have a lot of consequences, not just for the lives of these defendants, but for our country. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are confident that if you follow the law, listen to the judge's instructions, and use your common sense, that you'll have no choice but to find our clients not guilty. Thank you.
Uhuru 3 attorney Addie Griffin.
The only evidence we've seen from the prosecution is what they chose to pick out of 13 terabytes of information over a lifetime worth of reading. Agent Myers admitted that she made assumptions that are not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. She explained that the access handler relationship oftentimes included lies to get money for the reports that they were submitting. Myers admitted they worked on joint campaigns, and lots of times Omali was the one to decide and to direct. Omali was the one to demand. The government didn't provide that information to you, did they? They didn't come out? That didn't come out until we asked the questions. Ultimately, Agent Myers testified that the anti-globalization movement of Russia and the African People's Socialist Party had a bilateral cooperation program, and that within the 13 terabytes of information, there was never at any time any evidence that anybody in the African People's Socialist Party ever agreed to commit a crime ever. Nothing, not a shred. These were speeches and political activism that our clients were working on for 50 years. The defendants may not be convicted for their speech solely. All persons have a right to express unpopular speech. The government wants to tell you that when someone speaks on behalf or at the direction or control of a foreign government, in this case the Russians, that speech becomes an act and the First Amendment no longer applies. That isn't true. The First Amendment of the United States applies at all times to every citizen. Omali Shatella, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville are innocent. They did not commit a crime. I ask you to scrutinize the evidence, hold the government to their standard, make them do their job. I am confident that you will find them innocent. Thank you very much.
And finally, Uhuru 3 attorney Mataki Akbar.
They gave you this whole narrative that they were taking money for an article, for a petition, and just so Ionov could do what he wanted to do in this organization. That $8,500 in 8 years was enough for them to sell their entire organization to Russia. Also, the elections are being brought up. It's been all over the news. The Russians are interfering with American elections. They are hacking their computer systems and email. it's clear there wasn't any evidence of interference in the elections, no donations, no requests. It's absolutely clear. I'm going to close the same way I begun by saying Uhuru. Uhuru means freedom, free them.
Hmm. And Attorney Mataki Akbar was pointing at the Uhuru Three as he called on the jury to free them. In the rules of the court proceedings, the prosecution has a tremendous advantage. They actually get the last word. After the defense had made their closing statements, the government has another opportunity to make their case to the jury. Prosecutor Marcet took the podium, queued up his PowerPoint slides on the courtroom screen, and gave it his all, y'all, to mislead, lie, and further confuse the jury.
For 7 years, the defendants invited the Russian government, a government that considers the United States of America to be its main enemy, to operate on United States soil. A conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people to commit an unlawful act. In other words, it's a kind of partnership for criminal purposes. Call it whatever you want. Call it an alliance, call it a partnership. The evidence also shows that the defendants conspired willfully, which means that they conspired voluntarily and purposefully with the intent to do something law forbids, with a bad purpose to disobey or disregard the law. You've heard a lot of talk about, well, they didn't make that much money. Of course not. That's not what they cared about. If you read the emails after the Russia trip, it's very clear what they cared about. They cared about furthering their cause, and they were willing to do anything to do that, including partnering up with the Russian government. They have been doing this similar work for 50 years, and we brought to you evidence that time and time again, they did things that they had never done before. It's not in dispute that they had never petitioned the United Nations to allege genocide until Ionov asked and said he wasn't black enough to do it himself.
Y'all, I told you he was gonna lie, and it is in dispute. They held the first World Tribunal on reparations for Black people in the US in 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. Chairman O'Malley served as a people's advocate and argued that the US government was in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. At that time, the US had not even signed this convention, and without state power, African people did not have the legal standing to take the US to world court. But an international panel of judges heard the case and found the US government guilty and owing African people $4.1 trillion in stolen labor alone.
They had never conducted a tent tour to promote that genocide petition again until Ionov said to do it and came up with the money for it.
They were already planning the tour to mobilize Africans to testify at UN hearings facilitated by Mariel Fanon. The addition of tents to the plan was a minor modification and far from evidence of direction and control by the Russian government.
There's no evidence they had ever before sent congratulatory notes to Russian separatists in Ukraine.
The African People's Socialist Party has a long tradition of expressing solidarity with righteous people's struggles from all around the world. Prosecutor Marcet got really worked up when he came to the emotional defense of his lead FBI investigator, Kelly Bowen. She's the one who admitted under oath that there was no evidence of Russian interference in any of the Uhuru movement's local electoral campaigns, and she knew this was when she helped shape the indictment and press releases that put Russian election interference in the headlines.
Now, there were also certain allegations made about witness credibility. Now look, you can attack me, you can attack Miss Ossican, you can attack Mr. Goodman. We step into this arena on behalf of the United States, and we are willing to take the slings and arrows, but there is not an iota of evidence to attack the credibility of Agent Kelly Bowen, a woman who has dedicated her entire adult life to serving the United States of America, first as a member of the United States Air Force, then as a member of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, now is a member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who is still a member of the United States Air Force. There's not one iota of evidence to attack her credibility. The defendants are here because for 7 years, they invited a hostile foreign intelligence service. They knowingly invited a government that wanted to harm the United States of America into this country. They invited them to act on U.S. soil through them, and they hid that fact.
What fact? The only fact is that's a lie. The prosecutors misled the jury when they said a partnership or an alliance is equivalent to a criminal conspiracy. The Uhuru 3 attorneys had no opportunity to counter this lie. After Prosecutor Marsette's sweaty rant, the jury received their instructions and went to deliberate. When we return, we'll hear the reading of the verdict and Chairman Amali's actual response. So, Liana, how are we doing with our Mufunding Lake Prisoner Subscription Program fundraising?
Uhuru, thank you, Mariah. So we have raised about $220. I want to thank Comrade Sandy in Olympia, Washington for contributing $25. I want to thank Chair Mwezi of the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Coalition from San Diego, California for donating $120. Thank you so much, Comrade Chair Mwezi. Then we also have an anonymous donation for $25. Uhuru to that anonymous comrade. I also want to thank Comrade Lisa who donated $50. And I'm also going to go ahead and donate $25 and add it to that list. So please go ahead and donate any amount you can, any cent, any dollar counts. So you feel free to also do a recurring monthly sustainer, which you could do it every month and you could pick the level. So Chair Mwezi actually did the $10 a month recurring, so you guys can also do that. Tonight we have a goal to raise $1,000, which is the cost of shipping free copies of the Burning Spear newspaper to more than 800 prisoners across the U.S. each month. It is so important that we don't allow the U.S. colonial state to crush the spirit of our African brothers and sisters locked down in these concentration camps. And your dollars will make sure that they get the Burning Spear newspaper into their hands. From the letters that we receive each month at the Burning Spear office, we know that the Spear is a lifeline to Africans behind bars throughout the U.S. We've heard stories of copies of the Spear being passed around until they're ragged and falling apart. That's how precious this connection is to the outside world and to the worldwide African freedom struggle is to our people behind bars. Since its inception in 1969, the Burning Spear newspaper has been shipped for free to any prisoner who requests it. So today we are shipping each issue to over 800 prisoners, again at a cost of about $1,000 per month. So we ask you to please help us raise this $1,000 to cover the next month's printing and shipping for this very important and critical program. It's called the Mufunding Lake Prisoner Subscription Program, named after the heroic African political prisoner. For $25, you can sponsor a free subscription for one prisoner, or you can become a sustaining donor and set up an automatically recurring monthly donation. So please go now to theburningspear.com/prisoner-fund. That is theburningspear.com/prisoner-fund and make your contribution. And also, if you have a family member or friend in prison and you would like for them to receive a Spear subscription, you can go to theburningspear.com/prisoner-request, and then you can fill out that form, put all the information in there, and get that person you love and behind the bars a copy of the Spear. We of course cannot forget about our family and friends who are locked up. We stand with them and we call for an end to the mass incarceration of African people. So I want to thank everyone so far who have donated, and I want to empower everyone else to go ahead and donate. So back to you, Mariah, and the Burning Spear Media Readers Troop. Uhuru.
Oh, wow, so powerful, Soliana. Thank you, thank you. And y'all, come on now, go ahead and hit up that burningspear.com/prisoner fund and make your contribution. Like Soliana said, we can't forget about our family and friends who are locked up. We all have family, we all have friends in these concentration camps. Once again, that's the burningspear.com/prisoner fund. Make that request and donate that $25. Now, next up, the jury in the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century went out for the deliberations on Tuesday, September 10th. 2 days later, at 10:35 a.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, September 12th, they came back with a verdict. The judge enters the courtroom, followed by the jury. The courtroom is silent and tense as everyone awaits the verdict. The judge takes his seat. The judge confirmed with each juror that they agree with what's written on the verdict form, and then he proceeds to ask for their decision.
Members of the jury, have you reached a unanimous verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
I will now read the charges. Count 1, conspiracy under 8 U.S.C. 371. Count 2, acting as a foreign agent under 8 U.S.C. 951. In U.S. versus Omalia Shatella, how does the jury find the defendant?
The jury finds Omali Yeshatela guilty of count 1 and not guilty of count 2.
In U.S. versus Penny Hess, how does the jury find the defendant?
The jury finds Penny Hess guilty of count 1 and not guilty of count 2.
In U.S. versus Jesse Neville, how does the jury find the defendant?
The jury finds Jesse Neville guilty of count 1 and not guilty of count 2.
A split verdict. How could they be not guilty of acting as a foreign agent, but guilty of conspiring to act as a foreign agent? After the verdict is read, the jury exits the courtroom. The judge turns to the prosecution to see if they are requesting incarceration for the Uhuru 3 until sentencing.
Your Honor, we are not requesting that the defendants be remanded. We do not view them as dangerous or a flight risk.
Understood. I will be in touch regarding sentencing.
The Uhuru 3, Amalia Shatella, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville left the courthouse with their supporters jubilant at the political victory and determined to appeal the contradictory conspiracy conviction. Up and down the line, the prosecution failed to provide actual evidence that the Uhuru 3 were foreign agents of Russia. That's why the jury found the Uhuru 3 not guilty of acting as agents of Russia. Because of the exemplary job of the Uhuru 3 attorneys, the jury could see that when they showed the electoral campaigns of Jesse Neville and Akile Ane as evidence of Russia, the jury said no. When they showed the petition as evidence of Russia, the jury said no. When they showed the reparations encampment tour that organized Africans in various cities to testify at the UN about the genocide of African people as evidence of Russia, the jury said no. Chairman Amalia Shatella had this to say about the verdict.
The Uhuru 3 verdict is in. We work for Black people, not Russia. The United States government lied and lost. The Uhuru movement told the truth and won. On September 12, 2024, a jury in the federal courthouse in Tampa, Florida, repudiated the more serious charge of the United States government frame-up of the Uhuru 3 by finding myself, along with Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, not guilty of being agents of the Russian government. The prosecutors unleashed a barrage of lies and distortions of the law, along with deliberately confusing jury instructions to mislead the jury into returning an inconsistent verdict, convicting us of the lesser charge of conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States, which we intend to appeal and are confident we will win. But more importantly, the jury's not guilty verdict on the Russian agents charge means that the jurors agreed with the legitimacy of our efforts to advocate for the liberation of Africa and African people. We congratulate the jury for their ability to see through the U.S. government's attempt to criminalize criticism by Black people of the U.S. government's treatment of African people in the United States. The jury rejected the bogus charge that African people require leadership from Russians or by groups characterized as white to define and lead our struggle to end domestic colonialism. We salute the people's multifaceted, ubiquitous movement for anti-colonial free speech and democratic rights, whose tireless and heroic organizing contributed profoundly toward this massive victory. The United States government did not intend to lose their case on the charge that the Uhuru movement was working for the Russians, Their political goal was to use the foreign agent charge to deny the legitimacy of the Black Liberation Movement when we criticized the United States government for its treatment of African people. Their charge that we are foreign agents was meant to mute the significance of our criticisms of the killings of Black men and women by police, the mass incarceration of our people, the gentrification and other forms of colonial terror in our communities, by saying that it was actually the Russians who told us to say it. The US government expended a tremendous amount of resources, at least tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of FBI agents and other government personnel to carry out this sham trial. They stole from our properties at least 13 terabytes of data, the equivalent of 2.5 million books worth of information. They put 14 witnesses on the stand to present their evidence, all of them FBI agents except for 2 so-called expert witnesses who admitted they knew nothing about our case and claimed they couldn't remember how much the US government had paid them to testify against us. We defeated them without calling any witnesses to the stand. Instead, our incredible legal team used their opening and closing arguments, along with the withering cross-examination of the government's witnesses, to educate the jury about who we are and what our struggle is about. Our attorneys told the jury that Chairman Omali Yeshitela is a revolutionary who is not for sale. We showed evidence of Brennan Spear newspapers and other political documents by our party dating back to the 1970s, illustrating that we have always fought for more than 50 years for the liberation of our people. Under cross-examination, one FBI agent after another was forced to admit that there was no evidence that we ever agreed to work under the direction or control of Russia. The lead investigator from the FBI even had to admit under oath that the FBI and the Department of Justice knowingly lied to the people when they indicted us for election interference, despite the fact that not a shred of evidence of anything of the sort was ever identified. The jury saw right through it and was able to declare that the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela have never worked for the Russians. We have always worked for Black people. This was a political trial. The colonial state's goal was bigger than simply convicting me and putting me in prison. Their failed efforts to convince the jury that we are foreign agents was part of a larger political goal to forever discredit speech by Black people and other colonized people against our oppression at the hands of the United States government. The US government told the jury that when we demanded reparations to our people, it was the Russians who told us to do that. The jury said no. They told the jury that when we fought to expose and end the genocide against African people in the United States and around the world, it was the Russians who told us to do it. The jury said no. They told the jury that when we go around the world to win friends and allies to our struggle for freedom, it was the Russians who made us do that. The jury said no. The US government lied and they lost. We told the truth and we won. The jury saw the evidence presented both by the prosecutors and by our attorneys of more than 5 decades of consistent revolutionary work to free our people from colonial oppression. They saw that we are principled and passionate about freedom. The jury heard me speak through videos of presentations that were screened by both sides. Our legal team was brilliant. We applaud the relentless work by our attorneys, Addie Griffin, Mutake Akbar, Leonard Gutman, Angela Rainey, and Tom Inskeep. But here's what we are calling on everyone to do. Number 1, submit letters to the judge as we approach our sentencing date scheduled for November 25th, after which we intend to file a motion to appeal the conspiracy conviction. Stay tuned to handsoffuhuru.org for more details. 2, make plans to come to Tampa, Florida on November 25th to pack the courthouse for our sentencing hearing. 3, mobilize for a massive anti-colonial free speech mobilization in Washington, D.C. on November 2nd, 2024. The annual Black People's March on the White House, sponsored by the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. This will be an anti-colonial march led by Africans, Mexicans, Palestinians, Indigenous, Filipino, and other colonized peoples. 4, continue to stand with the Uhuru movement and the African liberation struggle. Support, protect, and defend our dual power programs for African working class economic development and self-determination. 5, continue to donate to the Hands Off Uhuru Legal Defense Fund at handsoffuhuru.org/donate. 6, finally, the most important thing you can do right now is to inform the world that the US government lied and lost. The Uhuru movement told the truth and won. The verdict is in. Chairman Amali Shatella and the African People's Socialist Party are not for sale. We have our own agency. We are our own liberators. We don't work for the Russians, we work for Black people, and we will continue to do so until all African people and the oppressed peoples of the world are free. Uhuru.
So, y'all, that was the chairman of Mali's official statement following the verdict. You heard him. We don't work for the Russians. Black people work for ourselves. So on Sunday, December 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida, a live streaming on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel, as well as on the Hands Off Uhuru and In Freedom Facebook pages, participate in an anti-colonial free speech rally demanding not 1 day in prison, free the Uhuru 3. And on Monday, December 16th, y'all, all freedom-loving people are encouraged to attend the sentencing hearing to show your support for the Uhuru 3. And you can learn more about that at handsoffyahuru.org. That's handsoffyahuru.org. And if you can't make it in person, y'all, Burning Spear Media will be live streaming from the steps of the courthouse and will bring you the first news of the sentences as they are handed down. Tune in to the Burning Spear TV channel on YouTube. So far tonight, we have raised a lot towards the Mafundi Lake Prisoner Subscription Program, allowing the Burning Spear newspaper to be printed and shipped for free to over 900 prisoners locked down in these concentration camps all around the U.S. I want to thank Christine in Florida for her donation of $25. Thank you, Comrade Angelica in St. Louis, for your pledge of $100. Thank you, MQ, for your donation of $25. And thank you, Ryan, for your donation of $25. Thank you, Comrade Leah, for your donation of $125, paying for a year of Burning Spear newspapers going out to 5 prisoners each month. And we are more than halfway to our goal of that 1,000. Can we reach this goal tonight, y'all? We need $455 more. Are there 4 more people who would donate $100 tonight? 8 people who would donate $50. Just come on, y'all, something. If we haven't yet contributed yet, I encourage you to do so at theburningspear.com/prisonerfund. That's theburningspear.com/prisonerfund. Just give what you can. Before we close this event, Burning Spear Media wants to salute all of the people who have made this production possible, including those volunteers who serve on the Uhuru 3 Trial Media Army. First, our leadership, Chairman Amali Yeshitela, founder of the Burning Spear newspaper, lifelong anti-colonial fighter who's courageously and relentlessly built a powerful fight back and put the U.S. government on trial. His wife, APSP Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela, architect of the Black Power Blueprint, who faced down drones and flak-jacketed soldiers during the July 29, 2022 FBI raid on their home. Along with Akile Nia, APSP's Director of Media and Communications, African National Women's Organization President Yejide Omila, Interim Leader of the Uhuru 3 Information Education Committee, and Soliana Bakel, Managing Editor of the Burning Spear newspaper. And the other 2 members of the Uhuru 3, Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, leaders of the party's white solidarity and reparations wing who never wavered in their commitment to, and as Chief Guevara said it, share the same fate, whether in victory or death. We salute the publicists and social media promoters who've introduced the Uhuru 3 to over 10 million people through an array of interviews, articles, posts, and engagements. Comrades Alika, Sandy, Becky, Diane, Zayi, Tasha, Kumba, Lisa D, Ann, Raya, Eric, Redbeard, Virginia, and Johan. Hats off to the photographers, videographers, audio and video editors, and the graphic designers who produced the content to share the story of the Uhuru 3's fight back with the world. Comrades Logan, Inida, Pop, Cesar, Paulo. We thank the live stream engineers and web developers from around the world who built and operated the tools to make the Hands Off Uhuru campaign accessible to an international audience. Lisa W., Joseph, TJ, Kabula, Chiwizo. Hats off to the court reporters, sketch artists, camera operators, writers, copy editors, and language translators who documented, preserved, and presented the story of the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century. Ruby, Hallie, Indigo, Wendy, Janine, Leah, Dylan, Paulina, Yabinga, Sheila, Kota, and Renee. And finally, salute to the brilliant actors and technical crew in this Reader's Theater series. Comrades Becky, Brendan, Kara, Diane, Dylan, Indigo, Jamie, Kobina, Kumba, Yejide, Yoga Lynn, Mariah, Redbeard, Sandy, Sarah, Talmadge, Wendy, Chiwaniso, Kabula, Coda, and Virginia. And if we missed you, we'll get you next time. Thank y'all for watching. And remember, y'all, Uhuru means freedom.